Good to see you in a new video on Betrayal Wife Tales. Today I'm going to tell you an interesting story of our subscriber.
I never thought I'd be the guy hiding in a closet of all things. But there I was, crouched in the cramped space, heart racing as I waited to see if my suspicions about my wife Laura were really true. Let me start from the beginning, though, because things didn't just lead to that closet overnight. It all started innocently enough, I thought, with just a couple of unexplained changes in Laura's behavior. We'd been married for 7 years, and while we weren't always in the honeymoon phase, I thought we were still good, solid even. But for the past few months, I had started to feel like a ghost in my own home. Laura's usual warmth had turned into polite, distant interactions, and her laughter, which used to fill the house, had grown quieter. I chalked it up to stress from her new project at work. But little by little, strange patterns emerged. There was one night in particular that set off alarm bells in my head. We were at my best friend Connor's house celebrating his birthday. Connor had been my buddy since college. We had practically grown up together. He was there through everything, through my courtship with Laura, our wedding, even the night we celebrated finding out we were going to be parents, though that joy was cut short by a miscarriage that nearly broke us. If there was anyone I trusted completely, it was him. As the night went on, I noticed Laura and Connor chatting in the corner. Nothing odd about it. He was practically family. But it was the way she was looking at him, the way she leaned in a little too close, her hand lightly brushing his arm as they laughed at a joke I couldn't hear. My gut twisted, but I forced myself to ignore it. I mean, this was Connor. I must have been imagining things, right? But that look stayed with me, gnawing at my mind. The doubts started building, small things stacking up. Laura's sudden work meetings that ran late, the messages she shielded on her phone, the time she would laugh quietly at her screen and refuse to share what was so funny. Each incident was minor, but collectively they screamed something wasn't right. After that night at Connor's birthday, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on. I'd never been the jealous type, but it was as if I had suddenly developed a sixth sense, warning me of a betrayal that my mind refused to accept. I wanted so badly to be wrong. For a few days, I tried to talk myself out of it. I told myself that maybe I was overreacting. But every time Laura glanced at her phone with that secretive smile or laughed at a message she didn't want me to see, my gut would twist tighter. One day, I worked up the nerve to ask her about her late nights. "Hey, you've been working late a lot," I started, trying to sound casual. "Everything okay?" She looked up, a flicker of something, panic maybe, crossing her face before she forced a smile. "Yeah, just the usual workload," she replied, a little too quickly. "Why, you think I'm up to something?" She chuckled, but her eyes were guarded. I forced myself to laugh along with her. "Nah, just making sure you're not working too hard." She seemed to buy it, going back to whatever message she was typing on her phone. But that moment stayed with me, raising my suspicions even more. That night, as she fell asleep beside me, I tried to convince myself I was imagining it all. But when I glanced over at her phone lying on the bedside table, the thought crossed my mind, if there was nothing going on, why would she be hiding it? I knew her passcode. It was my birthday. And I told myself that I'd just check, just to ease my mind. But when I reached over, her phone suddenly lit up with a new message notification from Connor. The words blurred in my vision as my heart hammered in my chest. I couldn't bring myself to look at it, couldn't bring myself to open Pandora's box. Instead, I placed her phone back as quietly as I could, rolling over to face the wall as a million questions circled in my head. What could Connor be texting her about this late at night? Had I misread their closeness? Or was I seeing the beginning of something that would tear my life apart? Every suspicion I'd shoved down came crashing back. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, my mind spiraling, dread gripping me as I realized I might be on the edge of discovering something terrible. After that sleepless night, I was no closer to any answers, but my resolve had hardened. I needed to know the truth even if it destroyed me. I began observing everything Laura did, every little thing she said. I hated myself for it, feeling like I was losing my mind, becoming some paranoid version of the man I used to be, But if there was any chance she was cheating on me, and with Connor of all people, I had to find out. Days went by, and each one brought another little clue, some new breadcrumb that confirmed my worst fears. Lara would say she was running errands, but would come home with nothing to show for it. Her phone was always by her side, and she never left it unattended anymore. One night, I woke up to find her sneaking out of our room to make a call in the living room. When I asked her about it the next day, she shrugged it off, saying she didn't want to wake me up. It felt like she was slipping away from me piece by piece, and every conversation felt like a test of my sanity. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed concrete proof. Confronting her without it could ruin everything if I was wrong. So I devised a plan. The next Saturday, I casually mentioned to Lara that I'd be busy the following weekend. I'd made up a story about a last-minute work event that required me to travel overnight. I wanted to see her reaction, to see if she would take the opportunity. And the strangest thing happened. She didn't look disappointed. She barely reacted at all. In fact, she simply nodded and went on scrolling through her phone as if I hadn't just told her I'd be away. That look sealed it for me. I didn't actually go on the trip, of course. I told her I'd be leaving Friday night and would be back Sunday afternoon. But when Friday evening came, I drove my car down the block, parked it out of sight, and called a cab back home. My heart pounded with a mix of dread and adrenaline as I hid near our house, watching, waiting. Hours passed with no sign of anything unusual. I was starting to feel like a fool, paranoid and embarrassed, when I saw her walk outside, phone pressed to her ear. I crept closer, listening as she talked quietly. "Yeah, he's gone." "No, come over whenever. I'm ready." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My heart sank as I realized what I had to do. That night, I called Connor, acting as if I was checking in before my trip. I faked some small talk, then mentioned, "Hey, it's been a while since we all hung out. Why don't you invite Lara over tomorrow? Just tell her you're bored and see if she comes over." The plan was set. The next day, I would be in Connor's closet, hiding like a damn spy. If Lara came over to his place, I'd have all the proof I needed. I barely slept that night, going over every possible outcome, wondering if I could even handle the truth if it confirmed my worst fears. The next day felt like it moved in slow motion. I left the house as though I were heading out of town, my stomach churning, but I circled back after a few hours. I parked a block from Connor's place and walked the rest of the way, heart pounding in my ears. It was almost dark by the time I crept around to the back of his house, slipped through the back door he'd left unlocked, and made my way to his bedroom closet. Hiding in there, time seemed to stand still. My mind went over every memory I had of Lara and Connor, piecing together every conversation, every little interaction I'd dismissed. I told myself again and again that maybe I was wrong, that maybe she wouldn't show up. But deep down, I knew. Then, after what felt like an eternity, I heard the faint sound of the door unlocking, followed by 2 sets of footsteps. The closet door was cracked open just enough for me to see into the room. I held my breath as they walked in, laughing softly. Lara and Connor together. They didn't waste any time. Connor closed the door behind them, and I saw Lara's hand slide up his chest as he pulled her closer. It was like a punch to the gut watching her with him, my best friend, like they'd done this 1,000 times. The way they looked at each other, the ease in their movements, the way she smiled at him in a way she hadn't smiled at me in months, it all shattered me. I wanted to burst out of the closet and confront them then and there, my fists clenched, rage boiling up inside of me. But something held me back. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, as if watching it a second longer might change the reality of it all. My heart pounded painfully as I stayed frozen, watching in disbelief as they fell onto the bed. Their voices lowered to whispers, but one line slipped out clearly, slicing through me like a blade. "I can't believe we've kept this a secret from him for so long," she said, her voice soft and full of something that sounded dangerously close to affection. I don't remember leaving Connor's house. One moment I was crouched in the closet, and the next I was out in the cold night air, the sounds of their laughter ringing in my ears. It felt surreal, like I was floating outside my own body, watching my life crack and fall apart from a distance. I walked home in a daze, my mind playing the same images over and over, each one stabbing deeper than the last. Every step I took felt heavier, but by the time I reached our front door, a steely resolve had settled over me. When I walked in, the house was dark and silent. I could tell she wasn't home yet. I had a while to wait. I sat on the couch, staring at the clock, watching the minutes tick by as the anger within me grew, turning from despair into something harder, something stronger. By the time I heard her car pull into the driveway, I was ready. The door opened and Laura stepped inside, oblivious, humming softly as she took off her coat. She hadn't seen me yet, so I cleared my throat. Her eyes snapped to where I sat in the dim light of the living room. For a split second, she froze, her face registering shock. "You're home?" she stammered, her voice shaking a little. "Yeah," I said, barely keeping my voice steady. "Got back early." I watched as her mind worked, her eyes darting around, searching for a story, an excuse. But before she could even start, I cut her off. "No need to explain, Laura. I know everything." The words came out colder than I'd intended, but I didn't care. I needed her to feel the weight of what she'd done. Her face went pale. "Jake, I don't know what you think you know, but stop!" My voice cracked, the anger breaking through. "I saw you with Connor at his house. You don't need to lie, Laura." She looked down, guilt and shame finally washing over her face. I could see she was scrambling, her mouth opening and closing, no words coming out. But there was nothing she could say. The truth was out, raw and ugly, and there was no taking it back. "Why?" The question hung between us, heavy and suffocating. "Why him? My best friend, someone I trusted." She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "It just happened. We didn't mean for it to go this far. I swear, Jake, it didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I laughed, the sound bitter and hollow. "You were with him, Laura. You were lying to me, sneaking around. You threw away our marriage for a fling that it didn't mean anything." Tears filled her eyes, but I felt nothing but a numb, hollow ache. I'm so sorry, Jake. I was lost. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't want to hurt you." Her words rang empty, an insult to the trust and love I'd had for her. I stood up, gathering the strength to say what I knew I had to. "Maybe you didn't mean to hurt me, but you did. You betrayed me. You and Connor, you've both shattered any respect, any loyalty that meant anything in this marriage. I deserve better than this, Laura." She took a step toward me, reaching out with desperation in her eyes. "Please, Jake, we can work through this. I'll end it with him. I'll do anything, just please don't leave me." But her words had no power anymore. They were as empty as the promises I'd built our life on, promises that meant nothing to her in the end. "No, Laura," I said, my voice finally calm. "I think it's over. For good this time." And with that, I walked out of our house, leaving her standing alone in the dark, the weight of her choices crashing down on her. I wasn't sure what came next, but I knew one thing. I was done being lied to, done being betrayed. Whatever future waited for me, I'd face it without her lies and deceit hanging over me. It was time to rebuild from the ashes, leaving her and Connor as part of a past I'd never look back on again.